Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 rebuild of the Colorado Rockies. We have now had a full year in our seat as general manager of the Rockies. Had a rough 74-88 record last season, but feel like we know a lot more about the team. Feel like we know a little bit more about building a team in Coors Field, and certainly appreciate all the advice and suggestions and recommendations that we've gotten over the first several episodes of this series, because I think it's definitely going to help us in this episode. We are at the start of free agency, and we are going to borrow a phrase from Spinal Tap, crank this rebuild up to 11 in this episode. I've spent kind of a fair amount of time offline over the last couple of days planning this thing out, and we've got a lot of moves that we are going to try to make in very short order to hopefully get this team into a better spot next year. The goal for ownership is to play close to 500 ball, and our goal is to certainly go from being a team that was well below 500 to a 500 record in the upcoming 2050 season. Taking a look at last season, we were first in the National League in runs scored, and we were 15th in the National League in runs allowed. So certainly Coors Field had a big impact on those results. I feel like our offense is probably average-ish. I don't think it's a great offense, but I don't think it's a horrible offense. But clearly we were helped by the environment in which we played 81 of our games last year. Our pitching staff clearly needs help. Take a bit of solace in that we were 6th in pitcher WAR, but we were, other than that, near the bottom in almost every category. Very surprisingly, we were 6th in the National League in home runs allowed, which is a bit shocking, pitching in Coors. I think our focus on ground ball pitchers with good movement, which we started a bit last year, and we're going to really focus on hitting hard this offseason, probably helped a bit. But the home run allowed number and the WAR number make me think that our pitching staff is probably not as horrible as you would think that a staff that allowed the most runs in baseball would be. But we certainly need to improve our pitching. That is priority number 1A. And priority number 1B is improving our defense. Defensive efficiency was worst in the National League. Zone rating also below average. So pitching and defense are priorities 1 and 1A for this offseason, and certainly going to be looking at any opportunities that we can identify out there to improve our offense as well. And with some moves we made, trading away some salary, letting some people hit free agency, and also moving on from some arbitration-eligible players, opened up some money. We've got $46 million plus to spend this offseason, even while maintaining $50 million in our scouting and development. Wouldn't mind if we can bump those up a bit at the end of the offseason, but our goal is to, as I said, be around 500 next year, hopefully bump up fan interest and start getting this team closer to really being a competitor here in the National League. So when I think about focusing on pitching, 2 key areas. The hope this offseason is to swap out perhaps some of our pitchers who are still on the team whose movement is not as good. And you can see we are definitely focused on pitchers with very good to, in some cases, excellent movement. But we've got a few that are lower, notably Elijah Ruiz and Ivan Mengetti, maybe even Jose Kim, that would potentially make sense to move on from because they may not be perfectly suited for success in Coors. And then other than hopefully getting some pitchers with big movement and ground ball tendencies onto our team, the other thing that we want to do is find some lefties that we feel better about. Clearly, Juan Vargas and Andres Arizari, the 2 lefties in the rotation, slot as our 1 and 2 pitchers right now, so happy to have them around. Although I know that some of you have been telling me that I should have traded away Eritzeri when I had the chance last year. Totally get it. There was a brief opportunity when he had waived his no trade clause that maybe I should have hit a little harder. But most of the offers were requiring us to keep a big chunk of his contract, which is now in its final year. So if we keep him around, we keep him around. If I can get some value for him, I'll get some value for him. But he's a ground baller, ground ball pitcher, pretty good movement, and he's proven to be pretty successful over the course of his career in Colorado. Four-time All-Star, spent his whole career with the Rockies, and was one of our top pitchers last year with a 7-5 record, 4.47 ERA. So feel okay with the lefties that we potentially have in the rotation. In the bullpen, though, we already talked about Jose Kim, who's one of the lower movement pitchers on our team, and then even Jordan Stallworth with 60 movement. Not exceptional. He did pitch well when he came over. We made a trade early this year with Texas to bring him on board, and he was very productive with a 3.58 ERA for us. Tend to think he'll probably revert in a different direction over the course of a long season and a second season in Colorado, but we never know. But I think bolstering lefty arms out of our bullpen and just adding talent, whether it's starters or relievers who have good movement, is kind of the strategy as far as the pitching staff for free agency and trades. And moving on to our offense, as I mentioned, I'm happy to improve offense anywhere I can. I don't think it is as critical need as our pitching and defense. Trying to figure out where we're going to go. Pretty happy with Victor Gonzalez, 23 homers, hit 257 for us. Also his above-average catcher ability and a decent arm. First base, Jamel Cohen, not great defensively, but he's a 6'2 first baseman, and he is a bat that we really need in the lineup. Third base, we're going to be going with Alex Ortega, who had a nice rookie season for us last year and certainly profiles as an above-average defenseman as a third baseman. The area where I think we can potentially improve in the infield, and it would be a two-way improvement, Juan Castillo, who we brought over to start at shortstop for us last year, viewed him as a guy who can play the key important positions in the infield, but shortstop is certainly not his natural position. And when we look at his fielding stats from last year, his range, his defensive efficiency were both below average. So the hope is to be able to find a shortstop, because that would allow us to move Castillo back to second base, where he will provide more offense and be better defensively than either Jose Brito, Danny Jackson, or Victor Maraquin, all of whom spent time there last year. And then if we can add a good defensive shortstop with a little bit of bat, we'll essentially be upgrading both shortstop and second base offensively and defensively if we're able to move Castillo over to second. So that is definitely a thought. And then the outfield could definitely improve the defense there. Tony Padilla, our center fielder, is solid. The issue, and this will be a common theme among our outfielders, he's fragile. Yoshitaro Nakahara is decent corner outfielder, but he's wrecked physically and he's 36 years old. Andrew Booker is fragile, even though he's only 25 years old. Not a particularly great defensive outfielder. And then you can see we only have 3 outfielders on the team because despite the fact that these 3 were all fragile and wrecked, we also have Juan Gonzalez, another fragile outfielder who finished the year with a broken kneecap that kept him out almost the entire season. And he is a little better defensively, kind of a prototypical right fielder, pretty good range, great arm. Would like if his error rating was better. But the issue is that we don't really have a backup center fielder, and every outfielder who's likely to make our team next year is fragile or wrecked physically. So if we could find, we'll call him a 4th or 5th outfielder, but it very well could be someone who ends up playing a significant role on the team, who's good defensively with a decent bat and is not particularly injury prone. I think that's something for us to look at too. So as we prepare to dive in on free agency in the trade market, we're looking at shortstop, outfield, both of whom have defense and hopefully at least a respectable bat. And we're looking for starting pitching and relievers, particularly lefties. And I think if we can bring some of those kind of players on board, we can definitely position this team to be better next year than we were this past season. Unfortunately, as we talked about at the end of our last episode, the crop of batters who are free agents this year is pretty thin at the top of the market, and a lot of fragile players in their early to mid 30s who are in many cases looking for a lot of money. And you can see there's only one shortstop even on this whole list, Eddie Campbell, who at 36 years old, pretty good defensively still, and love the fact that he's an Iron Man, but not much of a hitter at this point, doesn't bring anything as far as speed. Could be a fallback option, but the hope is we can find someone who's a bit better and a bit younger. So the goal is to see whether there's maybe someone in the trade market. Certainly there's nobody that interesting on the trading block at this point. The only shortstop of any note out there is Luis Linares, a familiar face to anyone who has watched our Pittsburgh Pirates series that we did before this Rockies series. He's also very good defensively, probably a little bit better of a bat, but he's wrecked physically at this point. Not the greatest personality in the world with that low leadership, and he's making big bucks, although the Pirates are not paying most of that contract. So he could be a guy to think about. But again, my goal is to get somebody younger who potentially has a better bat and a better personality. And unfortunately, when I try to search for a shortstop who is potentially good to excellent defensively and at least adequate in major league average-ish at all three of the major hitting traits, contact, power, and eye, there's a list of just 3 players out there, and 2 of them, Eddie Tafoya and Demetrius Washington, are veterans who are making a ton of money, who are still going to take a ton in trade to bring on board. But Rogelio Terrazas is a guy that we'll try to make a play for. Kind of fits the profile that we're looking for. He's young, only 25 years old. He would definitely be an upgrade defensively with that 70 range and 65 error rating from what we had out there this past year with Castillo. Not a Gold Glove shortstop, but certainly an upgrade compared to what we had. He's got speed. He's a good base runner, fan favorite for what that's worth. He's durable, and the bat is not exceptional, average-ish, quite honestly, likely in contact, home run power in his eye, but a bit of gap power, which would play, I believe, very well in cores with that speed. 49 doubles last year and 5 triples and 11 homers. You would think that he could exceed all of those numbers playing in cores every day. Don't know if he's going to hit 293, but cores would certainly help him do that. But it seems like he's coming off of probably a career year. Well, it is a career year, but it's also only his second season in the league. But he definitely improved from his first year to his second year. So the goal is to see whether we can bring Mr. Terrazas on board. Again, I'm not claiming that he is Ozzie Smith defensively, but as I said, he would be an upgrade defensively at shortstop over Castillo. And if we move Castillo to second base, Castillo would be an upgrade both offensively and defensively over who we had there last year. So help the offense, help the defense, and hopefully both of those things ultimately help the pitching staff. And straight up to bring Terrazas on board, it's a high price to pay. Either the young third baseman Ortega that we talked about, the young center fielder Padilla, or 3 of the top prospects in our system, the starting pitcher Cameron Miller, center fielder Bobby Perez, who's probably only a year away from helping us in the majors, and then Alex Ramirez, a second baseman who's one of the top potential prospects in our system. So the goal is not to give up anyone like that, but see if we can piece something together with lesser prospects and lesser talent that may interest the Nationals. And I think we've got a deal together. And we're even got Washington to agree to take 5% of Terrazas' minimum salary, league minimum salary next year. A deal together, and I feel pretty good about it, quite honestly. We got to give up second baseman Danny Jackson, who was our starter last year, but he did miss some games with injuries. Hit almost 300, not a ton of power. He's fine defensively, good work ethic. But he's going to turn 30 years old next year. He's already out of his minimum salary years, making over $2 million, on pace to make $3.5 million next year. And as I said, if we do end up bringing Terrazas on board, we're going to pivot Castillo to second base, and Jackson's going to go to a bench and go to our bench. And with the money he's making, he's a little older than those other guys I mentioned that he had been competing with for playing time last year, in terms of Marroquin, as well as Brito. So I kind of feel like it's fine to give him up. Certainly would do that straight up all day long. Not that the Nationals would. Have to also give up Frank De Los Santos. And he's a real prospect. But he's fragile physically, and he's almost 25 years old, so he's only a few months younger than Terrazas, even though he's only been in the majors for less than a year. He's listed as a shortstop. He's got good speed, and with his contact and gap power ratings and a decent home run power rating, he's, could be a useful offensive player. My issue with him, though, he's listed as a shortstop, and he's got average range and a horrible arm. Definitely wouldn't want to play him at short despite that great error rating. And quite honestly, with a 50 range and a 30 arm, I don't really want to play him at second, and I don't really want to play him at third either. So I look at it as the defense with him is definitely worse. The fragility with him is definitely worse. And he's basically the same age as the guy we're picking up. So I'm fine to get rid of him, because the other thing to think about with Terrazas is that we did draft a college shortstop in the first round this past season. So we certainly don't have any need for another shortstop in the system, because Cota is going to probably be up by the end of this coming season, if not at the latest, I would think 2051. So then you say, so why are you trading for Terrazas then? Because he's in his last year of a minimum salary, and then he's likely to be making $5 million in arbitration next year. But my thought is that we want to improve our defense. We want to improve our offense, and Terrazas definitely improves our defense right now. Even if we do end up bringing Cota, we could pivot him to second base, and then maybe move Castillo to third base, and then we're stronger, I think, around the whole infield, even more strong than we are today defensively. So in Terrazas also very well may price himself out of our range at some point in the next 2 or 3 years also. But so I feel like we can give up the shortstop, but I don't feel like bringing in Terrazas necessarily stands in the way of Cota when we want to get him up. And then we also have to put in a starting pitching prospect, Jaden Thornton, 24-year-old, picked him up just a few months ago in a trade with Houston, and we kind of thought he was a guy that might have some value down the line in a trade. He's a lefty, which we're looking for, which is good, but he's not going to have good movement on his pitches. He doesn't. His control's below average, and he's a fly ball pitcher. I just think he's a potential disaster in Coors Field. So although he probably has value, and he probably has more value to just about any team than the Rockies, don't mind including him to get the deal done, because I think that his chances of success with the Rockies are almost zero. So the good thing about this trade is getting rid of Jackson and De Los Santos, who's also on a major league contract at this point, making the minimum. We're actually going to free up a little bit of more money if we make this trade. And as I said, I think we strengthen shortstop this year defensively and offensively, and ultimately strengthen second base as well. So action number one is done, and Mr. Taratsis is now, hopefully, our starting shortstop next year. So I feel like we've made a little bit of progress on the defense with this first trade. Fans happy that we bring on Taratsis, so that's good. Get a fan boost up to 76. We will move him right on to the Major League roster. You probably saw that my lineups with the number of players we're losing this offseason are all messed up. Clearly, we've got a lot more work to do, but it looks like tentatively Taratsis is penciled in as our leadoff hitter and shortstop, and Juan Castillo moves right to second base like we would have wanted him to. So I feel like we've got one good move down, many more to go, and that actually opened up more money for us to play with. And the other thing that I mentioned we were looking for in terms of offensive players was an outfielder who was good defensively, could hit a little bit, and could back up center field for us, and also have some level of durability, given that the rest of our outfield is a disaster as far as their ability to avoid injuries. And we've come across Danny Ruiz, who's actually a shortstop by trade, and you can see he's definitely not as good defensively as Taratsis, but certainly a guy who we could play second, third, or short if we needed to. But his outfield ratings are really good. Could play him happily at any position in the outfield, including center field. Now, he was a first-round pick back in 2045. He's now spent 3 years in the majors with the Mariners. Hasn't really impressed. You can see he's put up just a 72 OPS plus and a 72 WRC plus, 36 homers in his first 3 seasons. He is coming off of the best season of his career at a 24-year-old, but definitely not a huge prospect anymore. And he's also in his arbitration years making about $1.5 million this year and expected to make close to $3 million next year. So this one will actually hurt us a little bit in terms of the money we've got available if we can bring him on board. But I do feel that he gives us a lot of optionality in the outfield, just with his durability. He's a right-handed bat. We're a little lefty-heavy in the outfield right now. And although he's only trained up in center and right field and actually could use some work in right field, certainly we could pivot him to left field if we needed to, but that's the area where we're going to likely be putting someone who's not as strong defensively. And I do like the fact that he gives us some optionality in the infield too. Those of you who were watching 2 series ago when I started out this OOTP 20 through playthrough in Kansas City may remember that about a decade into the playthrough, I had gotten to the point where I had a fair number of guys in their mid-20s who were like this, who were pretty solid defensive players who could play just about anywhere in the infield, just about anywhere in the outfield. And those guys did help that team win 3 World Series in a row. So I like a player like that. He does, according to our scout at least, still have some potential to improve his home run power. Clearly, if that happens in cores, it could be pretty useful. You know, the bat to me is a guy that you want as a 4th outfielder, not as a starting outfielder, and that's kind of the intent in bringing him on board. But the 4th outfielder type quality bat with average speed, decent base runner, good personality, fan favorite, and the ability to play above average to excellent defense at basically any position except catcher is pretty attractive to me. The question is how high the cost is going to be. And the cost for Ruiz is also going to be high, not crippling high, but there's only 5 players in our organization that they'd take straight up for him, 3 prospects. Andrew Booker, who's one of our fragile outfielders, but also a guy who hit over 300, over 30 homers, over 100 ribbies last year. One of the fastest guys on our team, although he only stole 4 bases for us last year. Not the greatest personality in the world, but a guy who is making the major league minimum again this year. So we'd prefer not to give him up. So it looks like we may be looking to ship Angel Cazares, who's almost 22 years old. He's definitely viewed as one of the top prospects in our system. He's only made it as high A ball. So he's still got probably a year and a half till he's going to be in the majors unless he really explodes next year. And it looks like he's still got a lot of growth ahead of him to reach his full potential. Now, if he does reach his full potential, he's a guy with 65 contacts, 65 home run power. Those numbers would play really well in cores. But he doesn't bring anything as far as his speed. Not the greatest personality in the world. Below average range in the outfield. Certainly his bat, if he fully develops, is a better bat than Ruiz. But I don't love Cazares as a prospect. He's going to strike out. Actually, he's going to strike out not all that often. He's just not going to walk. He's going to be a guy who's a 270 hitter with a 310 on base percentage, with some pop. But again, other than the pop, just doesn't bring anything to the table defensively, in the clubhouse, on the base paths. So I don't view him as a huge prospect. Certainly, I think he's a better hitter than Danny Ruiz is and ever will be. But I like Ruiz's defense. I like Ruiz's positional flexibility. I like Ruiz's durability. And I like the fact that Ruiz can help us this coming season. So we'll see if they'll retain any of his contract. They'll retain 20% of it. Again, it's a minimum contract, so it's not going to make... Actually, it's not a minimum contract. Ruiz, as we talked about, is making about double the minimum. But every little bit that we can save is money that we might get to put somewhere else. So I think Ruiz helps us get that 4th or 5th outfielder with some durability and a big upgrade on defense who can come in and be a respectable guy when some of our corner outfielders inevitably get hurt. Could also be our backup center fielder and be our regular center fielder if and when Padilla gets hurt, and he was hurt last year. So we're going to go ahead and complete this trade as well. Looks like the fans are happy that we brought Ruiz on board also. So our fan interest continues to creep up to 79. So feel like we've kind of done 2 of the things that we wanted to do in terms of improving our shortstop and our infield defense, and also improving just the healthiness of our outfield and giving us a little depth there, and a guy who could certainly play a very good backup center field for us. And as we talked about, he's also a guy who could have usefulness to us, is an injury substitute in the infield with his ability to play those positions defensively as well. So with Ruiz listed as a shortstop, it'll be interesting to see what our manager would do with him. And he would put Ruiz only in against lefties as our DH. We'll certainly be looking to get that glove into the lineup at places other than DH. But we're obviously only on November 16th, and we've probably got a lot more players to add, a lot more players to move off the roster before we get to even spring training, much less the start of the regular season. So we'll see how the lineup shakes out, and I'll obviously make any changes that I need in terms of overriding our manager. But like those first 2 moves, and kind of filled the 2 obvious holes we kind of felt that we had in the offense. And I'm feeling pretty good because we've got basically just as much money as we had when we started to now try to pivot and focus on the pitching staff. And the pitching staff is where we can potentially spend some big money in free agency. As we talked about at the end of our last episode, Rogelio Loera, possibly the greatest pitcher in Major League history, almost 5,400 strikeouts in about 3,300 innings. Can't even count all the Cy Young Awards. Is that 9 or 10? Looks like 9 Cy Young Awards, Gold Glove, perennial All-Star, and he did win a World Championship in 2039. Lefty looking to make about $38 million. Normally wouldn't touch a 37-year-old lefty, but he's durable, and you can see he's pretty much been out there for 30 games, 30 to 35 games a year, basically every year of his career, except 2044 he was too, because he split that season between Houston and Atlanta. So he's been an incredible pitcher. We did check in on him, and unfortunately he's not interested in joining the Rockies at his age and stage of his career. Probably the only thing he has to pitch for is a second World Series title. So our fallback, and it's a pretty good fallback, is Dave Alvarado, 30-year-old pitcher, so he's significantly younger than Loera, although he's only normal in terms of his injury proneness. But I think he fits Coors potentially perfectly. 70 movement, extreme ground ball tendencies. He's a ground baller who throws in the mid to high 90s. He's got a nice 5-pitch arsenal, above average control. Over the course of his career, 111 ERA plus, 90 FIP minus. He's definitely been an above average major league pitcher. He's not great, but he would certainly be our number one pitcher. And I think he's a pitcher who could be very effective in Coors compared to, just about any other profile that you could possibly get out there. Now, the issue with Mr. Alvarado is he is 30 years old, as I said, and he's looking for a 9-year deal at $26 million a year with a player option in that last season. Starting rotation guaranteed, which is fine. He'd be our number one starter. Wants a no trade clause, which we like to avoid if at all possible, but might need to include to entice a player like him. And then he's also looking at pretty big bonuses for a Cy Young or an All-Star. But he is going to be the guy that we try to spend probably more than half of the money that we have on free agents for. As I said, he would clearly be our number one starter. He's young enough that if we can get him to sign a contract for less than 9 years, we're not taking him on board until his late 30s. Question is how many years we're going to be able to potentially chop off of this contract, and how much money we can potentially chop off of what he's making too. And I do feel like I'd also like to make this contract a little bit front-loaded. We've got a lot of money to spend right now, and he is really the only marquee free agent that I think we're going to chase after. So I wouldn't mind seeing if we can come up with a shorter contract for a little less average money that pays him more up front that he's willing to think about. So we'll get to work on that. All right, Alvarado, as we talked about, was looking at 9 years at $26 million a year with a team option in the 9th season. We're offering him 6 years at $24 million a year with a team option. I think I might have said team option, but he wanted a player option in the 9th season. We're offering him a team option in the 6th season. So less attractive in terms of years, less attractive in terms of money, less attractive in terms of the optionality at the end of the contract. We did bump the Cy Young bonus up to $1.5 million. I think it's pretty unlikely that we're going to have to pay that to a guy pitching in Colorado half of his games. And we did also bump up the All-Star selection bonus a bit. He has been an All-Star once in his career. I think there's certainly potential that he'll earn that. I don't know what he's going to think of this. As I said, the years are lower, the money's lower, but the money's only $2 million a year lower. We bumped up some of the bonuses. We included the no trade clause. I think for a player like this to be competitive, we've just got to keep it there. And you can see we do have a little bit of front loading, 30 million, the biggest number in the first year, and then it kind of goes down as he heads towards his mid 30s, and then we've got the option in that sixth year of the contract if it really doesn't work out to get out even under from that 20 million. So I like the contract for us as a guy who can hopefully anchor the rotation for the next 5 years. And maybe if this team becomes more competitive, generates more revenue, and finds some young talent in the draft, is a guy who over the course of those 5 or 6 years could go from being our number 1 starter to maybe being a number 3 starter by the end of the deal, not because he's getting worse, but because we're hopefully surrounding him with some better talent. So I think if we can get him to sign this deal, it makes sense. Just have no clue what he's going to think about it, so we'll find out. He's willing to do $24 million a year. He wants 7 years with a player option. So we're in the right neighborhood. I would do 7 years with a team option if we can kind of structure this similarly. We might have something here. All right, I've got a 7-year deal, and we're basically, he was looking for 24.8 million. I actually read that a little bit wrong. I thought he was looking for right at 24. So we're coming back at 24, so only a little bit less than he was looking for. And I'm going to keep in the player option he wants for the 7th season. I don't love this, but I also don't want to anger him and have this negotiation end. We bumped up his Cy Young and his All-Star bonuses at all, so really all I'm doing is cutting the number he was looking for by $800,000 a year on average, structuring the contract to be a little more team-friendly, and letting him have the player option that he wants for the 7th season, which I don't love doing. But that $20 million figure 7 years from now, hopefully over the course of those 7 seasons, our team payroll has gone up by $50 million. And I don't want to say it's a rounding error because it's still going to be a big number if he's an awful player and he doesn't opt out. But I don't think it's a crippling number for us. And he's willing to think about it. So we've got an offer on the board, 7 years, $168 million to Dave Alvarado. A year longer than I really wanted to go, and don't love the fact that I've got the team option or the player option rather than the team option in that final year of the contract. But hopefully with the fact that the average number is coming down from 30 to 20, it won't be that painful, or won't be as painful if he opts in. The issue, though, is that if he's still an effective pitcher in his mid-30s, it's easier for him to opt out from that lower number at the end. But it is what it is. Felt like I didn't want to mess around with him. He's really our number 1 and only target for big money this offseason. So we'll see what happens with our white whale of the offseason, and you can see money for free agents with that front-loaded contract with a $30 million salary potentially next season. That's basically 2/3 of the money we had to spend this offseason, potentially going right to Mr. Alvarado. And this next trade that I'm thinking about is going to probably have at least one frequent viewer, if they are watching, throwing something through their computer screen. Because we are thinking about making a trade for Jose Calderon, the left-handed reliever, who a couple seasons ago in Pittsburgh we picked up at the All-Star break and put him into our closer role over a guy, Greg Gaylor, that was having a great season. And Calderon proceeded to be meh as our closer. He was fine, but not great. And he also proceeded to blow a huge game in the World Series as the Pirates lost to the Red Sox 4-2 in the 2047 World Series. So the fact that I'm even thinking about bringing him back is a 34-year-old making over $12 million is probably controversial. But we've talked about the fact that we need some lefty arms in the pen. Haven't really talked about the fact that we need a closer, but we do need a closer, and I think he's probably the most talented reliever that we would have on our team. He's got above average movement. He's an extreme ground ball pitcher, still throws in the mid to high 90s. If we can get him for a decent price, it's something to think about. Also, the one thing I will note, this is a player who, if we bring him on board, would have played with all three of the organizations that I've been involved in this playthrough. It was already 2040 when he was promoted to Kansas City, but if we do go back and look at his history, you'll see we picked him up in 2034 when I still was the GM in Kansas City. Less or a little over a year after he was drafted, we liked him as a prospect. We picked him up from the Padres, brought him into the Royals system, and he spent most of his career with the Royals. He did spend that half season with Pittsburgh, as I mentioned. So it would be kind of cool to have a player who we picked up in a trade when he was just a teenager in Kansas City, who pitched for us in the prime of his career and in a World Series in Pittsburgh, and now kind of joins the final team we're going to be involved in this OOTP 23 playthrough with the Colorado Rockies. We'll have to see whether we can piece something together, but I think he is a guy who could help us. And we've got a deal together to bring Calderon on board. And a lot of you are going to think I'm crazy for even considering this. Because if you're looking carefully, you will see we are giving up 5 starting pitchers and or starting pitcher prospects for a 34-year-old reliever who is in the final year of his contract. So we could be giving up 5 starting pitchers or starting pitching prospects, as I said, for a reliever who, even if he's healthy, may pitch 80 innings for us this year and then quite possibly move on to different and hopefully not greener pastures. But as I said, I think Calderon would be an upgrade for our bullpen. We need a lefty. And although there's some talent in the pitchers that we're giving up, I think it's another situation where they're players who are not destined to be very successful in Colorado. Nelson Escobedo has been a starter for the Rockies for the last couple years. Going to be 26 years old before the next season starts. But he's put up 4.92 and 5.93 ERAs. He does have decent movement on his pitches, but he's an extreme fly ball pitcher who throws in the low 90s. I just don't think he's ever going to be that successful in Colorado. And with the hope that we're going to bring on Alvarado, that probably opens up a spot in our rotation, particularly if we don't end up trading away Andres Eritzeri. So I feel like we can give up Escobedo. Mario Rodriguez is a 30-year-old. He's out all of next year with a torn UCL. He's a guy we picked up in a trade with Toronto, and then he promptly got hurt afterwards. His salary is almost $8 million, but we got Toronto to keep almost all of it. So essentially he's a guy that's making no money. He is an extreme ground ball pitcher with great movement, but his stuff is meh. His control is horrible, and he's going to be 31 years old before he potentially pitches again. Maybe he pitches a little bit next September, but even that's doubtful. So he's going to be a free agent before he ever pitches for us, or before he pitches more than maybe 1 or 2 games for us. So don't mind giving him up. Danny Young is, I don't even want to call him a prospect anymore. I mean, he's 25 years old. He was a first-round pick just 3 years ago by the previous regime out of TCU. He's made it as high as AA, where he's had a 4.70 and 4.64 ERA each of the last 2 years. Got great stamina, really good at holding runners, and does have decent movement. But his stuff is average at best to below average. His control is definitely going to be below average. Just don't think he's a big-time pitcher. Alex Zubbiati is a 34-year-old who's wrecked physically. We signed him to help our minor league system. He's got a great personality, great mentor for the younger players. Don't mind throwing him in. And then Michael White is a 23-year-old who doesn't have the best personality in the world, an extreme fly ball pitcher with no movement on his pitches. Doesn't really look like a legitimate prospect. He's made it as high A ball. Didn't perform all that well there. But we're giving up a solid major league starter, admittedly one that's probably not well suited for Colorado, and a middling pitching prospect in Danny Young, along with an old guy with a great personality, a young guy who's never going to do anything, and a bit of a wild card in Rodriguez. If he comes back healthy and being what he was before his injury, can be a useful pitcher. But I generally don't love guys with that bad control, so I don't mind moving on from him. So it is 5 starting pitchers, but with the exception of Escobedo, who's a good 4th or 5th starter in the majors right now, but as we talked about, not perfect for Colorado with that extreme fly ball tendency, and Danny Young, who maybe becomes a 4th or 5th starter, I don't feel like we're giving up anyone who's a big part of our future. And Calderon may not be a big part of our future either, but he's going to help make us better next year when we're trying to get this team over 500, hopefully get some more fans in the seats, get some credibility with ownership, and get a bigger budget next year. And I think Calderon can help us with all those things. So we're going to go ahead and pull the trigger on this trade, and I'm guessing some of you aren't going to like it. The fans liked it, so that was positive. Gave us a nice boost to 85 in fan interest, and you can see we did get them to keep 25% of that contract, but we're going to still be on the books for about $9 million with Calderon next year. So he's going to be expensive. But as I talked about, I felt like we needed lefties, particularly in the bullpen, felt like we needed bullpen help, and you can see Calderon does potentially slot right in as our left-handed closer for us. So we've made 3 trades, brought on a closer, a shortstop, and a super utility guy. And we've made an offer for, in our view, the second best starting pitcher out there and the best starting pitcher that would actually consider coming to Colorado. And we've got about $9 million left to spend. So we've gone through some of our money now. Now the question is, what do we want to do with the little bit of money that we potentially have left? And the last thing we're going to try to do right now is see if we can find some pitchers who may be Coors friendly. So we're looking at all the free agents out there, and you can see there's a lot of guys with pretty good movement on their pitches who are out there. Some of them are looking for insane amounts of money, and some of them are really kind of only maybe looking for minor league deals. The issue with the guys looking for minor league deals is that you end up with a guy with 25 stuff or even 40 stuff potentially, but still maybe something to do there. But clearly we're going to see if there's anyone who can help us at the major league level, in addition to Alvarado, who hopefully will be a Rocky in a few weeks. And we found a couple guys that we may try to bring on board to help our major league bullpen, and you can see we did make minor league contract offers to a few of those other guys to bolster our minor league system. One of them is Jaden Bethel, 29-year-old, to be 30 early next season. He's a right-hander, he's durable, got a really good personality, and he's a ground ball pitcher with good movement. His stuff and control are nothing exceptional. He does have enough stamina to start in a pinch. I don't want to be him to be a starter for us if we pick him up, so I wouldn't guarantee him that role. He's been a below average pitcher, at least according to ERA plus and FIP minus over the course of his career. But I think he could still be a potential upgrade towards the back end of our bullpen, and particularly if we've actually improved our infield defense with the upgrade at shortstop and pivoting our shortstop to second. His ground ball tendencies may play decently well in cores. I don't know, as I said, whether we're going to be able to get him anywhere. He's looking for a one-year contract at $2.2 million. We're not going to guarantee him a starting rotation spot, and we're going to start out not offering him as much money as he would have hoped. But we will give him an option. Yeah, we'll actually offer him a little bit less. We'll give him $1.8 million this year, but a $200,000 buyout if we don't want to bring him on for a second year. See what he thinks about that. He's really set on a one-year deal. He really wants to be a starter. We'll give you the $1.9 million that you were looking for, but for a one-year deal, but we're not going to guarantee you a starting role. He really wants to be a starter, huh? All right, we'll give you $2 million, but you can't be a starter. No, he wants to be a starter. So I don't think that's going to work for us because I don't think he's good enough to be a starter for us. We've already got Ethan Mingo on board, who is potentially our sixth starter right now, who wants to be a starter. Tyrone Colbert, who we picked up in a trade. Vargas, who was our free agent signing last year, and then Eritzeri, Moore, and Gonzalez, who were all holdovers, in addition to the fact that we're hoping to bring Alvarado on board. So I just think it's unwise to guarantee someone who would at best be a fifth starter for us, to guarantee him a starting role when I really want him as the bullpen. So I guess that's the first guy that we've kind of looked at this offseason where things didn't quite work out and line up the way that we hoped, but there are plenty of fish in the sea. And one of those fish is a soon-to-be 34-year-old lefty named Latrell Young. 34 years old, throws left-handed, honestly a pretty similar profile. High movement, extreme ground baller, better stamina and better at holding runners. The issue is I don't know if I want him as a starter. I would love to have him, especially with his effectiveness against left-handed batters, as a reliever. I wouldn't mind him as a starter, given that he's got better stamina and hold runner ratings than Bethel did. But as I talked about, I don't know if I really have a spot for him as a starter. So we're going to try to have the same conversation with him. He wants 1 year, $4.2 million, wants to be a starter. Question is, if we don't guarantee him that role, can we sign him? And we're not going to fool around with option years and team options for a guy who's going to be 34 years old. We just want you for 1 year, dude. Be a nice left-hander out of our pen. You may be a spot starter at times, but we're not going to guarantee you that role. So he was looking for 4.24 in a guaranteed role or a promised role as a starter. We're offering him $4 million with no specified role. He wants the $4.24 million in the starting rotation guaranteed. So probably not going to work out with him either. We'll offer him a little more money. Actually, in the case of a major league player, $60,000 a year is actually only a little more money. So we'll offer him a little bit more money than he was looking for, but not going to guarantee him that role. Yeah, he wants to be a starter. So we've struck out with a couple of these pitchers that I think could have helped us. But as I said, there's a lot of options out there. We'll have to find someone who is either not suited to be a starter or doesn't care if he's not a starter. Unfortunately, the next option we've come up with is another guy who wants to be a starter, but we'll see if we can convince him otherwise. He's got the stamina, he's got the four-pitch arsenal, got the movement and the ground ball pitcher combination. He's a ground baller pitcher type. Marcus Caldwell wouldn't be a bad option. I'm guessing he's going to be like the others and want that starting rotation goal role guaranteed. We'll actually offer him even more than he was originally looking for. 1.8 million, so an extra $100,000 a year if you let us not promise you that you're going to be a starter. And he's not willing to think about it. He says he wants even more money in the starting spot. We'll offer you 1.9, but we're not going to guarantee you the starting role, Marcus. Yep, not going to work with him either. Maybe we can revisit some of these guys down the line. The market doesn't develop for them as much as they would have hoped, but I just feel like we potentially have a surplus of starting pitchers, particularly if we do the most important thing of the offseason and get Alvarado signed. And I don't want a bunch of guys whining and moaning in the clubhouse because they have to pitch out of the bullpen when I lied to them and told them that I thought that I would allow them to be a starter for us. And we're down to our fourth option, but this is one I'm pretty sure we will be able to bring on board. Concern with him is that he's almost 36 years old and will be 36 next year. Doesn't have the greatest stuff in the world. He's got a nice curve, a below average cutter, and those are his two pitches. But he's a reliever. No stamina, but he's got really good movement. He's an extreme ground baller. He's an Iron Man as far as his injury proneness. And Navarez, over the course of his career with a 1.13 ERA plus and a 91 FIP minus, has definitely been an above average pitcher. Almost $5 million a year for a almost 36-year-old reliever. Doesn't make me feel great, but I'm not going to make a long-term commitment to him. And I do think that he would fit the profile of what we want in cores better than anyone we have on the team. Unfortunately, he doesn't want to join the team. So we are really striking out with these guys who we thought might be decent options for our bullpen or our starting rotation. Might be time to go back and lie to one of those guys who was willing to join us. And I think our last try here is going to be Orlando Sanabria. He's fragile, which I don't love. But he's got a good personality. Excellent movement, extreme ground baller. Doesn't have the greatest control in the world. He wants to be a starter, so may run into the same issue we've ran into the other guys, but going to at least talk with him. He was looking for 1.4 million, wanted to be a starter. We'll offer him $1.5 million with no specified role. He's not willing to think about it too. So I think at this point, we're going to let the off-season play out a little bit. You know, we don't have tons of money with $9 million for free agents. It's conceivable that not all of those guys are going to be offered starting roles, and we may be able to revisit with them in a few weeks or a couple of months. But I like what we've done to kind of get the season or the off-season off to a start here, and really interested in finding out what happens with Mr. Alvarado and whether we're able to get him on board with that 7-year contract that we offered him, or whether a more well-heeled organization may come in and offer him more money and get us into a bidding war. And it may be something where we have to use some of this money to bring him on board. I do feel like he's potentially a huge part of our off-season in terms of upgrading the rotation. So let's sim ahead a bit and see what happens with Mr. Alvarado, as well as the other players we've made offers to, although those are minor league free agents, so a little less exciting. And we've heard from Mr. Alvarado, and he says he's leaning towards signing towards us, but he's got to give it a little more thought. So we'll see what happens. We're getting close to the winter meetings starting next week. Would love to get them locked up before we get to the winter meetings, because who knows what can happen there. The other thing that I do want to do before the winter meetings is One of our owner goals is to increase attendance to 36.4 thousand a game by the end of this season. You can see we almost got there last year. We're only a couple 100,000 away. I'm going to lower our ticket prices just a bit to $24. Hopefully that will allow us to sell more season tickets, and then hopefully also will maintain fan interest at a pretty high level, although outside of the potential to add Alvarado, I think we've done our big moves for the offseason with the trades that we've made at this point. And we are going to have some hits to fan interest when some of our free agents sign with other teams. So I think it's very conceivable that we go into next season with a fan interest number in the 70s. So I think the ticket price probably has to be a little lower. And then the hope would be that we're successful on the field and we can maybe boost it a bit to get attendance over that mark. The hope is also that attendance will go up, so we'll still be able to generate more revenue per game next year than we did this past season. Actually, I'll be a little less aggressive with the cut and just cut it $1 to 25. The owner goals sometimes make you do wacky things. And I said I want to be 500 next year, which would be the most important thing to keep ownership happy, but we're only 200 people a game, actually 137, not even 200 a game away from the attendance goal. We're so close that I just have to hit it. It's just my personality. If there's a goal out there and I can hit it, I'm going to try to hit it, even if I'm cutting off my nose to spite my face by potentially generating a little less revenue next year. But the hope is that we're better on the field, the fans are interested all year long, and we're either selling out almost every game or, even if we get the attendance up into the 40,000s, I can raise ticket prices a little bit over the course of the summer to make up the gap if the team is doing well. But we won't know the answer to that until next summer, but just want to make sure that the modest decrease we have in ticket prices goes through before the end of the winter meetings when we start selling those season tickets. And interesting things are happening here as the winter meetings begin. The Yankees just made an offer to us for Eritzeri. And it's a minor league right-hander, Elijah Jackson. He's not really a Coors pitcher. I mean, he's a borderline major league pitcher to begin with, but fly ball profile with below average movement, poor control. Just not what I'm looking for. I would get rid of Eritzeri, as we've talked about, but he is also open to trades to a lot of teams right now that we've begun the off season. So that is definitely something for me to explore more aggressively going forward. Not going to make any moves until I figure out what's going on with Alvarado. But if we do bring Alvarado on board and then we trade Eritzeri, then maybe one of the movement-focused pitchers that we had been talking to earlier as free agents that wanted to be promised a starter role might feel a little less bad about doing it, since there's more of a chance that through injuries or just perhaps them being a little better than our fifth starter that they'd actually get that role. But I want to avoid those problems if at all possible. And I think the Rockies are technically going to be in the lottery this year. We will be, with that 74-win season. I want to say I think we had about the 12th worst record. I think we were 12th in the lottery picking. So we'll see where we ended up. Maybe we got lucky, and we'll get a big pick next year. Oh, that is awesome! The Rockies did move up from that 12 spot all the way to number 3, only behind the Cubs and the Rays. So that could potentially be huge for us to really jumpstart this this rebuild. That is big, because as we've talked about, my goal is to be back to 500 this coming season. So this is likely to be the best pick, and hopefully will be the best pick we ever get with the Rockies. But the fact that we're moving up 9 spots to third overall definitely is going to give us an opportunity to bring on a player who could be very impactful for us down the line. So that's really positive. The fact that Eritzeri is, now that we're in the off season, open to a lot of different options is potentially positive. The issue is we got to figure out what's going on with Mr. Alvarado. Says he favors the offer. You know, if we bring him on board and then trade Eritzeri, then all of a sudden we've got about $30 million to play with. The issue is that I don't know that there's anyone we want to spend $30 million on. I mean, quite honestly, it may become a situation where we go back, like I said, to a couple of those moderately priced pitchers who want to be starters. We could also pick up another one of our former closers in Ricky Rios, who does have a great profile for cores with almost off the charts movement, extreme ground ball tendencies, durability. $16 million reliever isn't really what I want to do. But, these Rockies are different than the Pirates throughout the playthrough of them, and different than the early stages of the Royals playthrough, in that, it's a middle market team as far as the budget, tied for 19th. It's not a shoestring budget. It's certainly one that we wish could be higher, and certainly can probably go 30-40% higher if we're successful in Colorado. But a $16 million pitcher is a luxury for the Rockies, whereas for a team like the Pirates, it was an impossibility. So I'm not saying that we would do that, but if we did move on from Eritzeri and we didn't need to make a long-term commitment to somebody like Rios, that could be an option that would keep us from having to give up any more capital in a trade to bring on some help for the pitching staff. And we've landed our whale here on the second day of the winter meetings. Alvarado announced that he's going to sign with us. We have to give up a third-round pick. That's fine. Going to have to make the most of the first and second rounder this year, especially that we're picking near the top of the draft in the first round. Amazing increase in fan interest, and we've got Dave Alvarado locked up for the next 7 seasons. As I said, with the optionality that we gave him, the length of the contract was probably a year longer than we wanted to go, and don't love the fact that he's got that team option when I think he's going to be 36, 37 years old. But I felt like I didn't want to mess around with him. I didn't want to open the door to anybody else, and I also didn't want to upset him much in the negotiations. So Mr. Alvarado is on board, and we'll see what the rotation looks like now with Alvarado on board. Assuming he is going to slot right in as our number 1. Yep, so that's good. So we have got our erstwhile ace in Dave Alvarado. You can see Vargas and Eritzeri still slot in as 2 and 3. Moore, Gonzalez, and Gilbert. And then Ethan Mingo, who wants to be a starter, is in middle relief right now, and he's already demanded a trade because he wants to be a starter. So that's definitely not positive, but it is positive that we've added the ace of our rotation. We've added a closer. We have added a starting shortstop. And we have added an incredibly talented defensive player who can play just about anywhere in the infield or outfield for us, including center field and shortstop. So I feel like the offseason is off to a really interesting start for us. Like I said, we've still got $9 million to spend, so we've still got the opportunity to improve the team more. And the fan interest bump was huge, up to 94. That almost makes me think that there's time to revisit ticket prices and maybe put it back to the 26. As I said, I know that we are going to be taking some hits. here in free agency as we lose players who were on our team last year. But I didn't realize Alvarado was so popular, but that's certainly a positive for us, another positive for us. So I've got a lot to think about before the next episode and would love some thoughts from viewers in the comments down below if you had any. What do we do with ticket prices? I know most of you are going to tell me to jack them rather than to lower them, and I get it. It's all about the revenue. But I do want to hit this owner goal because although I think we're getting closer to being a 500 team, I don't know that for sure. This Coors thing still has me, I don't want to say confused, but I don't really completely understand the impact of Coors, and hopefully building a pitching staff filled with pitchers who I think are going to be good there is going to help me figure it out because last season we were 38-43 at home and 36-45 on the road. So just a 2-game differential. I guess that's a small home field advantage, but I would certainly like to see that number growing and expanding in the coming years, and that would make me feel that what I'm doing in terms of the pitching staff and the defense is actually helping us to be a more effective team at home than we are on the road. So thoughts on ticket prices, thoughts on what to do with this $9 million. And the other thing that I obviously need to think about is what to do with Eritzeri. He is in the final year of that contract now, and we're not hard-pressed for money. So I don't hate keeping him, but if I can get something decent for him in terms of prospects, it opens up a ton of money for us. Again, it will weaken the rotation, getting rid of our number 3 starter, which I don't love. But we could put more money into scouting and development, even if we can't find a free agent to spend it on. But it also, as I said, does give us the opportunity, if we moved on from Eritzeri, to go ahead and pay a lot of money for a reliever like a Ricky Rios, another guy who I had been looking for that we haven't really talked about, who fits that role a bit. Thought was around here. Mr. Vega. Have you already signed with somebody? Oh, I think he may be gone. Who was it? Was it Tony Vega? Pretty sure there was a pitcher named Vega who had really good movement that was a free agent. It wouldn't be Sergio Vega because he is too young. I think it was Bobby Vega. I don't know how I could be spelling Vega wrong. Maybe he's still a free agent. Could also just search the free agents by name. Huh. Oh, there we go. Okay, Bobby Vega. If I could spell, that would help. Yeah, he's another guy looking for about $12 million. He wants to be a starter. But he's the type of guy that we could potentially go at to replace Eritzeri if we did move on from him. Not a ground baller, but still has good movement. And at least he's got a neutral tendency. He's not a big-time fly ball pitcher. So I don't think he's a perfect fit for us. But, guys like Vega or Rios making, 12, 16 million would be the type of guys that we could potentially bring on board for a year or two if we did trade away Eritzeri. So if you've got thoughts for me, would love to hear them down below. Let me know how you think the off-season's going, what I could have done differently, what you would have done differently, and most importantly, what you think I should do going forward. And we will continue the off-season in our next episode, finish up these winter meetings, go on to the Rule 5 draft, and then, as I said, the big decision is going to be potentially shopping Mr. Eritzeri and seeing if we can get anything interesting from him now that he is willing to drop that no-trade clause. So, a lot to think about. Until our next episode, thank you so much for watching and hope you have a great day.